Before I started making this film, I knew nothing about Bobby Kennedy. A privileged guy with 10 kids who became a hero to Black and Hispanic communities and promised to heal a divided America. Then a year before I was born, he was assassinated. This is the story of Kennedy and his assassin. The official story, the evidence against, and the others who may have been involved. This was America in April 1968, in the days after Martin Luther King was assassinated. Washington burned and days of riots left the cities in ruins.
Wildtrack Sam, 11 April 68.
This film was shot by the National Guard as they kept order in the streets. On the soundtrack, a priest urges people to prayer.
Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Christ have mercy. Lord have mercy. Almighty God, look with mercy upon your family. Guide and guard us in body and soul by your bounteous grace and protection.
And I'm telling you, we can have fascism tomorrow if the whole community does not act now and recognize the threat to white folks of what is happening in the Black community.
As American cities burned, Robert Kennedy stepped forward to heal a divided nation.
When King was killed, Kennedy was to speak to a large outdoor group of blacks in the inner city in Indianapolis. And they didn't know that King had been shot. God knows if they could have had guns, they would have been violent. He stepped up to this young white privileged guy and he said, I have bad news to tell you. Martin Luther King has been killed in Memphis. And this, oh, goes over the crowd.
For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. My favorite poet was Aeschylus, and he once wrote, even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
Incredibly eloquent, absolutely off the top of his head. This was no spin, this was no counselor, no people crafting his words. This was him. That was his great moment. And I think that's the kind of thing we lost with both King and Kennedy, the two of them together. The ability to ring the bell, to prick the conscience of the country, to ask us to be better than ourselves.
The next day, Kennedy spoke in Cleveland about assassination.
No one, no matter where he lives or what he does, can be certain who next will suffer from some senseless act of bloodshed. And yet it goes on and on and on in this country of ours.
2 months later, he too would be assassinated. When John Kennedy was elected president in 1960, Bobby became his right-hand man, serving as Attorney General and overseeing the secret war on Castro. But after his brother died, he was slowly transformed into a gentler, more compassionate figure. A 17-minute ovation at the 1964 Democratic Convention brought his raw emotions to the American public. Distrustful and marginalized by President Johnson, he quit the cabinet in 1964 to run for senator in New York.
We're here tonight, and there's very little more I can say except to introduce the former Attorney General of the United States and candidate for the United States Senate from New York, Robert F. Kennedy.
Aren't you really using New York State as a kind of jumping-off place for your own presidential ambitions?
We have a Democratic president. He's going to be elected in 1964. In my judgment, he's going to be reelected. He's going to be re-elected in 1968, so that the earliest that I'm going to be jumping off someplace is 1972, which is 8 years from now. I'm going to have to be a wonderful United States Senator. I hear somebody else outside said, are you going to serve your whole 6 years? Well, I don't know where I'd go.
With Johnson's help, he won the election and joined the war on poverty, visiting black slums in the inner city, Kentucky and Appalachia. He also reached out to Cesar Chavez and the Mexican farm workers during their grape boycott in California.
He was the only national political figure that would go to Delano and support the farm worker struggle. He was very compulsive about seeing a social problem, economic problem, and then want to find the answer to it and do something about it. So he was our kind of activist.
By 1968, huge protests swept the country over the war in Vietnam. And in cities torn by racial tension, the Black Panthers were preaching revolution.
But I say violence is necessary. Violence is a part of America's culture. It is as American as cherry pie.
America is in trouble today, not because her people have failed, but because her leaders have failed. We see Americans dying on distant battlefields abroad. We see Americans hating each other, fighting each other, killing each other at home. As we see and hear these things, millions of Americans cry out in anguish. Did we come all this way for this?
There was a craziness in the country and a wildness and a violence. We were in the midst of our second Civil War here in the United States. It was that serious and much more intense than you're seeing about Iraq or anything like that.
Kennedy's supporters wanted him to spearhead the anti-war movement and run against Johnson for the presidency, but Kennedy didn't want to be seen as an opportunist.
Robert Kennedy temporized about whether he should run for president or not. He was ambitious, he was against the war. Was it the right time to run or not?
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
It was against the advice of a lot of people, including his brother Ted, but it was something he felt he had to do for whatever reason, and that he ran and he got killed.
Tomorrow's citizen needs people. People who know how to plan for his future. He needs them in the right places, now. People like Robert Kennedy.
One thing is clear in this year of 1968. I believe in this country as I've traveled across, and that is that the American people want no more Vietnams.
In August in Chicago, the Democratic Party will nominate its candidate for President of the United States. There are two roads to that nomination. One is to seek commitments through discussions with political leaders. The other is to go to the people.
I think this is a great country, and I think we've accomplished... Get a haircut. I'm just at the pitch of my campaign speech, and I look around and it says, get a haircut. I got a haircut. No matter what happens, I get a very tough road ahead. America was a great force in the world with immense prestige long before we became a great military power. The real constructive force in this world comes not from bombs, but from the imaginative ideas, the warm sympathies, and the generous spirit of a people.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
With the president out of the race, Kennedy took to the campaign trail. He started out away from the cities in the heartland of Indiana and Nebraska.
Robert Kennedy on a family farm.
That much to produce it.
Yes.
How can we make the people in the city understand our problems?
Well, elect me president of the United States.
Robert F. Kennedy in Indiana.
Even here at home, I've seen children here in the United States starving without adequate or satisfactory meals, whether it be in eastern Kentucky, whether it be on some of our Indian reservations, or whether it be in the Delta area of Mississippi. Young children starving to death. Well, obviously, we can work out a system where you can produce these goods, and those goods be made available to our own population.
This is the most dangerous time that you can possibly live in, but that also makes it the most interesting time. Camus said that he wouldn't exchange his time with any other time, just for that reason. We had great prestige a number of years ago around the rest of the globe, but it wasn't because of our military power and it wasn't because of our economic power. It was just because people believed in us and believed that we would do what it was right, believed that the principles that we attempted to follow within our own country, we stood for around the rest of the globe, and they don't have that same confidence now.
By the end of May, it was clear California would make or break Kennedy's political career.
It's the 30th of May, I'm gonna ride all the way on the train to my home, California. And I hear people say all the way with RFK on the train to my home, California. And the train has a dream for the great San Joaquin. Can you hear what this song tries to tell you? As the train passes by, sing a dream never dies, like the grass of my home, California.
Well, he had just won Indiana and South Dakota and lost Oregon. Oregon was the first time a Kennedy had ever lost an election, so coming into California, they were going for broke. Cesar Chavez, seeing that Robert Kennedy was doing so much on behalf of the farm worker struggle, organized over 200,000 new voters in California. That's never been done before. We saw for the first time in Latino communities, people lined up at the polls before the polls opened. This happened in the black communities in California as well. And we've never seen it since. So there's something there that he had, something very special.
And so if a man follows the difficult and rewarding path of the primaries, if he is willing to come in to the fresh, stern air of popular judgment, he could do worse than submit his hopes to California. For me, this primary is a vital turning point. To you, it is a choice about the kind of future you wish. California is the largest of our states. In Tuesday's election, however, it will be all of America.
On June 4th, vote for Robert Kennedy.
Kennedy won California and looked set to challenge Nixon for the White House. Just after midnight, he gave his victory speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles.
As we're walking through the kitchen towards the embassy ballroom, it was one of those wonderful scenes, kitchen workers coming over to shake hands with him, and Viva Kennedy, and Kennedy for Presidente. And it was just that kind of celebration of people who really needed the presidency more than anybody else in the country. And so we walked out and went on the platform, and he made this wonderful victory speech.
What I think is quite clear is that we can work together in the last analysis, and that what has been going on within the United States over the period of the last 3 years, the divisions, the violence, the disenchantment with our society, the divisions, whether it's between blacks and whites, between the poor and the more affluent, or between age groups, or on the war in Vietnam, that we can start to work together. We are a great country, and a selfish country, and a compassionate country. And I intend to make that my basis for running and over the period of the next few months. Mayor Yorty has just sent me a message that we've been here too long already. So my thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you very much.
Moments later, he was assassinated.
Oh, my God. Senator Kennedy has been shot in the head. I am right here. Rayford Johnson has a hold of a man who apparently has fired the shot. He still has the gun. The gun is pointed at me right at this moment. I hope they can get the gun out of his hand. Get the gun. Get the gun. His hand is frozen. Get his thumb. Get his thumb. Take a hold of his thumb and break it if you have to. Get his thumb. Okay, now hold on to the guy. Hold on to him. Hold on to him, ladies and gentlemen. They have the gun away from the man.
24-year-old Palestinian Sirhan Sirhan is seen firing at Kennedy in a kitchen pantry and is arrested as the lone assassin. And notebooks at his house seem to incriminate him. He carries the motive in his shirt pocket, a newspaper clipping about Kennedy's promise to sell 50 bombers to Israel. But only a last-minute change of plan led the senator into the killing zone.
After Robert said, it's on to Chicago and let's win there, he was supposed to go down to the Ambassador Ballroom downstairs. And I heard Eddie Manazian say, we're going to the Colonial Room for a press conference. So instead of coming down the way we had gone up, he turned around and went through the back of the stage.
Kennedy's campaign manager, Fred Dutton, made the route switch 5 minutes before the end of Kennedy's speech, with Bill Barry, the ex-FBI agent who served as Kennedy's unarmed bodyguard throughout the campaign. They thought it was too late and overcrowded to go downstairs, but nobody seemed to know about the change.
The arrangement had been he was to go off the podium on the other side to go down to the lower ballroom to speak to the crowd. And suddenly, when Bob came by me, heading out the back door, I couldn't figure it out, and so I decided that I was going to run after him and stop him and tell him he was going the wrong way.
When a voice shouts, "Senator, this way,"
Senator, this way.
Kennedy turns and follows maitre d' Carl Euchre off the back of the stage, wrong-footing his security team. Euchre led Kennedy behind the curtain and through a backstage anteroom. Instead of going downstairs, they turned right towards the double swinging doors of the pantry, on their way to a press conference in the Colonial Room. Kennedy shook hands with supporters as he walked through a narrow passageway jammed with 77 people. He stopped to shake hands with 2 waiters at the edge of a metal steam table when the shots rang out. The X on the floor marks where Kennedy fell after he was shot.
The place is so crowded and packed, the place is hot, and I decided to get off the platform, and I walked in through the doors and wound up in the pantry area and stood there waiting, and then I saw him coming through the swinging doors. Then he stopped and shook hands with 2 guys in the kitchen who were standing up against the wall. And I remembered saying, you know, this is a guy who's really going to be the president. As we turned to go, I followed. And all of a sudden, you know, there were flashes and crackling I heard. I started shaking violently. I remember that. So I just fell and went out.
As soon as he finished shaking hands, I knew he'd turn around and I would be able to tell him, you know, you're going the wrong way. And at that time, all of a sudden, it was the string of shots, which I thought initially were firecrackers. I really did. I thought some idiot had done that. And I looked over toward the noise. And out of the crowd of people at the end of the steam table, there was this arm with a gun in it.
I asked Frank to reenact the shooting with our lighting case as Robert Kennedy.
The moment of the shooting, I am standing off of Bob Kennedy's right shoulder at about this position. And I hear the noise, and I look there, and I see an arm with a gun sticking between a crowd of people. Then look back in the direction that the gun was pointed, and I saw that Robert Kennedy had thrown his hands up to his head and was starting to turn this way. Then I looked back, and the gun was coming forward, and I met it like this, underneath his arms, sort of in a bear hug type of thing, and several other people grabbed him, mostly from behind. I got very concerned that somebody was going to kill him. They were bending his back such that I was afraid they were going to break his back, and I wanted him to go to trial. Nobody had gotten the gun away from him by then. Rosie Greer had it pinned against the table. As I looked down, the gun was pointing right up at me, and I thought, I sure hope that thing is empty.
Kennedy, after he got shot with the first shot, his hands went up to his head, like that. And he started to spin to his right. The second shot, it appeared the bullet hit him because his right arm went limp. And it went down to the side, and he started falling back towards me. The third bullet, I believe, is that the bullet that hit Paul Schrade, because at that point, Paul went down. Carl now has got the gun. He's banging the gun. I'm watching the bullets come out of the gun as every time he hits it, he fires. Goldstein gets hit. What number bullet, I don't remember. He hits me on my right shoulder. I am now falling. But I'm now on the ground. I have Kennedy on my legs. I've got Paul under my left arm, and I've got Goldstein on top of my right shoulder. I'm basically on the bottom of a pile of people. And crying. I was hysterical. Carl literally had his hand banging it on the cabinet, trying to get him to release it. Finally, After the gun was empty, he was still banging his hand, and you could still hear the gun click. He was still trying to shoot at him on the ground. When we were on the floor and the shooting was finished, I was on my knees and I crawled over to the senator. First thing he said was, "Is everybody else all right?" I said, "Don't say anything, just don't speak." All he was concerned with was everybody else. Something I could never forget that. To see a man who knew he was probably going to die, worrying about everybody else.
It was just, a horrible time from then on to know that we had lost him that way. We won and we lost all in a matter of moments.
200 million Americans did not strike down Robert Kennedy last night, any more than they struck down President John F. Kennedy in 1963, or Dr. Martin Luther King in April of this year. But those awful events give us ample warning that in a climate of extremism, of disrespect for law, of contempt for the rights of others, violence may bring down the very best among us.
Early the next morning, June 6th, Robert Kennedy died. His death cast another dark shadow of grief across America.
Thousands came out to mourn Robert Kennedy as he made his final journey by funeral train to Arlington Cemetery in Washington.
My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. As he said many times in many parts of this nation, to those he touched and who sought to touch him, some men see things as they are and say why. I dream things that never were and say why not.
The LAPD concluded all 8 shots were fired from Sirhan's gun. 3 hit Kennedy's body and 5 others were injured. According to police criminalist Dwayne Wolfer, shot 1 was the fatal bullet, hitting Kennedy behind the right ear and penetrating his brain. Shot 2 passed through the shoulder pad of Kennedy's coat and struck Paul Schrade in the head. Shots 3 and 4 hit Kennedy under the right armpit. 1 bullet lodged in his neck, the other passed through and got lost in the ceiling. Shot 5 hit Ira Goldstein. Shot 6 struck the floor and hit Erwin Stroll. Shot 7 hit William Wiesel in the abdomen, and shot 8 hit the ceiling and bounced down to hit Elizabeth Evans in the head. But the police description of the bullet that hit Paul Schrade made him doubt the official version of events.
Their description of the bullet that hit me was one that went through the shoulder pad of his coat. Didn't hit him, but went through about here and came out in the back and hit me in the head. And looking at the photographs of Dwayne Wolfer, wearing Robert Kennedy's jacket, passing a rod through those 2 holes, and I'd have to have been much taller than I am at 6'4" for that to have gone into my head. And there's no real explanation of that.
According to the autopsy report, all 3 shots that hit Kennedy were fired at a sharp upward angle at a muzzle distance of 1 inch behind Kennedy and to his right.
The actual shooter of Robert Kennedy was standing behind Robert Kennedy, according to the autopsy report. Sirhan was standing in front of him, face to face. The distance between the muzzle of the assailant's weapon and Robert Kennedy's body was somewhere between actual contact and no more than 3 inches. And the weapon was held at a sharp upward angle, again from the rear. All the witnesses state that Sirhan's weapon was held between 1.5 and 6 feet away from Robert Kennedy, horizontally in relation to the floor. The autopsy report exonerates Sirhan.
Carl Euchre is seen leading Kennedy through the pantry in this 1971 reconstruction. Euchre insisted Kennedy had just turned to face Sirhan when the shots began, that Sirhan's gun never got closer than 1.5 to 2 feet from Kennedy, and that he grabbed Sirhan after the first 2 shots.
If that bullet which killed Kennedy, that was an inch away from his head, this bullet didn't come from Sirhan. Did not come from Sirhan, because he never got that close.
Another witness, Lisa Urso, said Kennedy was still shaking hands when the shots started, but placed the gun 5 feet from Kennedy in another reconstruction. What was the distance between the muzzle of the gun and Kennedy?
Well, that's something that I can't be sure of, but I know it wasn't 6 inches or anything like that. It was a matter of a foot or two at the most, you know, and could have been even a greater distance. The angles of the gun that I saw was either horizontal or slightly or pointed downward, not upward.
Evan Freed was 6 to 8 feet from Kennedy when the shooting started.
Sirhan would have been directly across from me, and the senator would have been to my left. The senator took a couple of steps forward, so we were sort of walking toward each other when the shots began. It took me at least 2 shots before I realized what was happening, because it went pow, pow, pow. At that moment, I looked over and I saw Sirhan shooting. Sirhan, for at least a second and a half, was all by himself, standing in front of where the senator was, with people converging on him, but at that moment, he was free to fire his gun. And he wasn't moving when he was shooting when I saw him. He was just standing still with the gun held horizontal, shooting. And I would estimate that the distance between him and the senator at that point was about 5 feet.
This police diagram shows the witnesses clustered around Kennedy at the time of the shooting. Those who were asked all placed the gun 1.5 to 6 feet from Kennedy, except LA Times photographer Boris Yarrow, who was looking through a camera lens and could only see Kennedy and Sirhan in silhouette. Even if Kennedy was still shaking hands, turned to one side as Wolfer suggests, the muzzle distance seems too great.
The first burst of gunfire could not have been that close.
But the police and FBI never asked Burns about the muzzle distance.
The issue of distance never came up. It was never discussed. Distance seemed to be something that came in later on when people read the autopsy report and said, how could that be? Somehow there's 2 guns.
But I did find one new witness who could place the gun much closer. Vincent DiPiero had first spotted Sirhan in the kitchen before this speech.
I thought he was a regular dishwasher. I thought he was somebody who worked downstairs, and I didn't think anybody that was back there didn't belong. He was walking through the kitchen. He was, you know, looking. I thought he was looking for a place to stand, so when the senator came down, he wanted to shake his hand. I mean, he wasn't like casing the place. He wasn't like looking suspicious. And that's how I recognized him again as we came through the doors, because he was standing on the tray stacker. I saw him starting to get down, figuring he's going to go shake his hand. Disregarded Kennedy. I was watching the senator. The next time I saw him was when I saw his arm come up with the gun, because he was crouched down. He was literally crouching like he had a stomach cramp. And all of a sudden he came around with his right arm, came up. He pushed Carl with his left hand, and he came straight up, and he reached. He was lunging. And the gun was in an upward angle. His hand was going up towards his head. And when he pulled the trigger, Sirhan himself was standing probably 3 feet away, but the gun, the muzzle of the gun couldn't have been more than 3 to 5 inches away from his head. Carl was, I think, taken off guard the way he went around him. He literally went on the inside part of the cabinet, slid along the keg, and pushed Carl, who was pulling Kennedy to go to the colonial room. The first shot definitely was Sirhan pulling the trigger. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that Carl was in the way. Carl did grab his arm. Whether it was the 3rd shot or the 4th shot, I wasn't counting. I was praying I didn't get shot.
I read Vincent the statement he gave the FBI 2 days after the shooting.
I saw this individual reach his right hand around Mr. Euchre, and in his hand he had a revolver which is pointed directly at Senator Kennedy's head. The revolver was about 3 to 5 feet from Senator Kennedy's head. This individual then shot Senator Kennedy in the head. Senator Kennedy at this time threw his hands and arms up, reeled backwards, and fell to the floor. Mm-hmm. Your statement saying that the revolver was about 3 to 5 feet from Senator Kennedy's head.
I think that was really mistaken. Sirhan was standing 3 to 5 feet away, but his arm was extended, and when he extended his arm, he was a few inches from his head.
Vincent insisted he didn't write the statement.
That was not my handwriting that you showed me. I did not write that.
But the same day, Vincent gave the following testimony before the grand jury. How close did the suspect get to the senator? It couldn't have been more than 6 feet. How close to the senator was the suspect when the gun started firing? 4 feet, 4 to 6 feet.
When we recall something, very often we may recall the gist, but many of the details are part of our way of reconstructing the memory. It's very much like an iceberg that melts and then refreezes again. When it refreezes, it's still an iceberg, but it's not exactly the same shape as it was in the first place. Now that's what our memory is like. We may remember the gist, but the details can be generated by our what we think happened.
There was also evidence that more than 8 shots were fired in the pantry.
The police knew that they could not discover any bullets on the crime scene because 7 bullets were taken from victims and an 8th was supposedly lost in the ceiling. Any evidence of additional shots would confirm that multiple shooters were involved because the capacity of the so-called Sirhan revolver was 8 shots. Previously undisclosed FBI photographs confirmed there were bullet holes in the pantry door frames. These were circled by an LA Sheriff's Department deputy. The FBI labeled these as bullet holes. There were witnesses that the police criminalists were digging out bullets from the door frame. Those bullets never materialized. They were never disclosed. The LAPD removed the door frames and ceiling panels and destroyed them before Sirhan's appeal even got off the ground.
I discovered new film of an unknown finger pointing out these bullet holes. Look at the size of the lower hole on this strip of moulding. It's much larger in the FBI photo, suggesting an attempt was made to dig something out of it. And FBI agent William Bailey remembers seeing 2 bullets in these holes.
I saw 2 bullet holes in a center divider. I saw 2 bullets in the holes. I have serious reservations whether or not any of Bobby's wounds were inflicted by Sirhan's gun.
There are a number of candidates for the second gun, but the most obvious one is a security guard named Thane Eugene Caesar, who was, unlike Sirhan, standing in exactly the position and location he had to be to fire the shots that he had at Robert Kennedy. Thane Eugene Caesar was standing behind Robert Kennedy and in contact with him, by his own admission, where the shooting began. He dropped to the floor and reached for his weapon. One witness saw him fire.
Caesar's clip-on tie lay on the floor beside Robert Kennedy after the shooting. Here we see Caesar without his tie nearly an hour later. Caesar's gun was never checked on the night of the shooting. He told police he had sold his .22 3 months before the assassination.
A receipt proves that it was sold after the assassination. The person who made out this receipt confirmed Caesar told him at the time of the sale, "Be careful of this weapon, it was involved in a police shooting." He was the obvious first suspect. The police brushed him off and never investigated him further.
There was also evidence of another conspirator, the girl in the polka dot dress. 20-year-old Kennedy volunteer Sandra Serrano was sitting outside in a fire escape when she saw 2 people fleeing the scene.
I was standing there just thinking, thinking about how many people there were and how wonderful it was. Then this girl came running down the stairs in the back, and said, "We've shot him, we've shot him." And I says, "Who did you shoot?" And she says, "We shot Senator Kennedy." A boy came down with her. He was about 23 years old, and he was Mexican-American, because I can remember that because I'm Mexican-American. She had on a white dress with polka dots. She was light-skinned, dark hair, and she has a funny nose. I thought it was really funny. All my friends tell me I'm so observant.
After nearly 40 years, Sandra kindly agreed to her first interview since the night of the shooting.
It was very claustrophobic in the ballroom. You could barely move. I just stepped out onto the fire escape and a little balcony attached. While I was sitting there, 3 people passed by, a woman and 2 men. And the woman, I remember, was definitely an Anglo. And at the time, I thought both men were Latinos. They went in and said, "Excuse me," very polite. Then a little later, 2 of them came out and like tripping over each other and tripping over me. And I said, "What happened?" They said, we shot him. I said, "You shot who?" And they said, "The senator." And I said, "What?" And then I remember going into the ballroom and everything was chaotic, absolutely chaotic. I remember very distinctively that she was wearing a white dress with black polka dots, like a little ruffle around the collar, like a bib top, sort of. Dark hair, definitely, like a little pixie kind of cut, and a nose that sort of like Bob Hope and Richard Nixon kind of nose, a little bit ski. There's certain things about what happened that day that I will never forget. And the statement, we shot him, I will never forget that. So I'm very clear in my mind that that's what was said. Both guys actually were short.
A guy in a gold sweater went up and down with the girl, but the second man didn't come down. Sandra described him as a white male, 23 years old, 5'3", with curly bushy hair in light-coloured clothes. After seeing the picture of Sirhan in the newspaper, she felt certain this was the same person.
That's what it was, seeing the photograph in the LA Times, and I said, wow, it really does look like that guy.
As Serrano stuck to her story, Sergeant Enrique Hank Hernandez was brought in to give her a polygraph test.
He was a very frightening person. And he was like some Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type, One minute he was just like really, really nice and soft-spoken, like a wonderful big brother. And then the next minute he was like, you're an awful person and you're hurting the Kennedys.
I've seen those people.
No, Sandy. Remember what I told you about that? You can't say you saw something when you didn't see it. Sandy, look, I can explain this to the investigators where you don't even have to talk to them, and they won't talk to you. I can do this. But please, in the name of Kennedy.
I remember seeing a girl.
No, I'm talking about what you have told here about saying a person tell you we have shot Kennedy, and that's wrong. No, it isn't, Sandy. Look, I love this man, and you're standing here, right now, if he can't even... Well, I'm trying not to shout, but this is a very emotional thing with me, too, you see. If you love the man, the least you owe him is a courtesy of letting him rest in peace.
I felt like I was a criminal. That's my best description. I felt like I was a criminal, and I had done something wrong. You didn't do that. You didn't see that. You weren't there. You're making all of this up. Why are you doing this? Just a lot of browbeating. So, during later years, it crosses your mind. Why did they invest so much in beating you up? If there was nothing there, why did they beat you up so much? I remember thinking that he was lying. And then thinking, no, he can't lie. He's the police. The police don't lie.
Finally, Hernandez wore Serrano down.
I remember saying to him, whatever you want me to say, I'll say, okay? I'm not here to hurt anybody. I don't want to do anything bad. So whatever you want me to say, I'll say. And they were the cops. They were the good guys.
Hernandez pressured Serrano into a retraction and concluded she had never seen Sirhan in person and had fabricated, for some unknown reason, the girl in the polka dot dress.
Someone in the LAPD said that it was not going to be another Dallas. They were going to wrap it up real quick. And so I remember when I read that and talking to my uncle and aunt who I lived with at the time, we all sort of said, yeah, right, maybe that's why they were so hard on you.
But Serrano wasn't the only witness to see a girl in a polka dot dress. De Piero's description of the girl was almost identical to Sandra Serrano's. An attractive brunette in a white dress with black polka dots and a ruffled bib-like collar.
There was a girl that I saw. He glanced at her as though a guy was checking out a girl. Whether they were together, I doubt it, but I mean, I don't think that she would have wanted to go out with somebody like him, but he was standing on the stacker and she was behind that, to his left.
And what was she wearing?
The famous polka dot dress.
Do you remember what colors it was?
Oh, I remember them as white and black, but they could have been purple, they could have been a dark color. I don't remember exactly.
During the trial, Vincent identified Valerie Schulte as the girl. Schulte was standing in the pantry but had blonde hair, wore a green dress with yellow polka dots, was on crutches and had no contact with Sirhan.
Whether she had blonde hair at that time or not, I don't remember. But I remember seeing what I thought was brown hair. All I remember was she was very pretty. And she looked just like Valerie, unless she has a twin that had blonde, dark brown hair.
The LAPD agreed that Schulte did not match De Piero's description. The final report concluded Sandra Serrano had no knowledge of a girl in a polka dot dress until she spoke to De Piero. There must have been a mutual agreement between them as to the description of the girl and the polka dot dress. Valerie Schulte was named as the only girl in a polka dot dress in the pantry. Miss Schulte is blonde and slender and does not fit the description which Serrano supplied investigators in any way. Sirhan grew up in the family home in Pasadena. His sole surviving family member is his younger brother, Munir, seen here in his first ever interview.
We came to the U.S. by a Christian sponsorship. I believe it was the Nazarene Church brought us here as refugees from Palestine. We were a normal Christian, God-fearing family, believe it or not, at one time. Mom worked at the Presbyterian Church, teaching children. One brother was an entertainer. They'd always have feuds, entertaining, belly dancing, and mother's an avid Christian and what have you. But other than that, just a normal, happy-go-lucky Christian, God-fearing people, believe it or not.
Sirhan was born in Jordan in 1944, and both brothers experienced heavy bombing during childhood.
It's like sticking your tongue into a 220-volt current. I mean, the whole ground would shake, the buildings would shake. You were terrified not only of the sounds outside, but the screaming in the confinement of the makeshift bomb shelters. But because of those facts, they've sheltered me from the Middle East. So I'm more of an American than I am. And even things that I do remember, they tried to make me forget them so that, to go on with life. It was a new beginning.
Sirhan grew up a shy teenager. He dropped out of college after the death of his sister and worked as a gas station attendant.
He liked to play pool. He liked music. He liked to read a lot. He was interested in languages. He would go around the house narrating phrases in various languages, Spanish, Russian, French. He wanted to be a UN interpreter at one time. So, his vocabulary was up to par, so to speak. I don't know what sidetracked him from that to go to horse racing.
In 1966, Sirhan left home to work as a stable boy and trained to be a jockey, but a few months later a nasty fall ended his career before it started.
He was working a horse, and due to the fog, it bucked him into the railing, and he had a severe injury to the head. And he wasn't the same afterwards. He was a little shaky. I don't know how to describe it, but he just wasn't himself. He was a little aloof and a little more tense and what have you. And just wanted to be more or less by himself after that for some odd reason.
After the fall, Sirhan's interest in mysticism grew. He joined the mystical order of the Rosicrucians and took to hypnotizing himself in his room.
He had a fish weight hanging from the light in his room, and I asked him what that was all about, and he said it has something to do with his mystical powers, so to speak. Once in a while he'd get mail, from the Rosicrucians, and Mom would ask him what that was all about, and wouldn't elaborate much.
In March 1968, Sirhan asked Munir to help him buy a gun.
Sirhan said to me that he used to belong to the ROTC program in high school, and he wanted to acquire a gun so he could practice. So I made him promise that he'll throw it away after he practiced, and I'll see what I could do. While at work, I asked one of the fellows there, did he know of a gun that I could buy? He said, yeah, he has one. So I told him to come to the house, and that was it. That was history. It was never discussed. I just forgot about it. I woke up like a normal day. My mother was gone, Adele was asleep. I went to work as normal, and I saw my colleagues sitting in the coffee shop. I looked over at the TV and said something to the effect that Bobby Kennedy has been shot. All of a sudden, I saw Sirhan's picture on there. It said something to the effect that if anyone recognizes this fellow, to get in touch with the police. I looked at it once, and when I took a closer look, I ran down to my superiors, and since I didn't have a car at the time, I asked them if I could borrow his car to run home. Complete shock, devastation, shock. And when we first saw him in jail, I think Mother and I went up first. When Mother first asked him, he says, "Mother, I don't remember. I don't know what happened." And he says that to this day, when you ask him about the particulars of that night, he doesn't recall.
Munir rejects the idea that Sirhan was the first Arab terrorist.
Sitting here, you're in Sirhan's home. If we were sitting here and a fly happened to venture in, your reaction or mine would be grab this fly swatter, grab something, kill that fly, get it out of here. Sirhan would open the door, and he'd try to pull the fly out and make it go out the door again. I mean, life meant something to him, and especially through the things that he went through. We all went through, the upheaval in the Middle East and what have you. How many people do you know that'll open a door and let a fly out? It's not conceivable to me that the guy would actually take a gun, and whether he was 5 feet away, like most people say, or 8 feet away, or an inch away, it's just not conceivable to me that he would take a gun and actually use it against a person.
He was such an unlikely assassin. He was kind of a chicken shit, to use an American expression. Example, he worked as a grocery boy in a store in Pasadena, and he got very angry with the owner one day, and then he said, then I called him a goddamn son of a bitch. And I said, "Oh, did you call him a goddamn son of a bitch right to his face?" He said, "No, I said it under my breath so he couldn't hear me." Well, that kind of a guy, it's very unlikely that he's going to be a macho assassin. How does he make that transformation? Sirhan was a highly suggestible young man. He was not an idiot. He was quite intelligent. He was well-read. He stuck to the story that he didn't remember killing Robert Kennedy.
Kaiser helped bring Grant Cooper into the case as Sirhan's attorney.
He was kind of a warm, friendly human being who didn't think along the lines of conspiracies, and he didn't have a suspicious mind at all. He pretty much took people at their face value.
Mr. Cooper said, well, he was there, and he was there with a gun. There's nothing to do but plead guilty and try to save his life. And we were always at odds with the with the defense team. In fact, Mother used to even write to the judge at nighttime. She felt that the attorneys weren't doing enough.
We had so much eyewitness evidence that Sirhan was indeed the shooter. We kind of took the LAPD's word for it, and in the trial, that's what Cooper did. His idea was not to make the LAPD look bad. It was to convince the jury that Sirhan did not have the emotional capacity and the mental capacity to meaningfully and materially reflect on the gravity of his contemplated act. That's language from the law of diminished capacity in California.
The diminished capacity defense was based around Sirhan's fall from the horse in 1966.
From the people that I talked to that knew him before and that knew him after, said he was never quite the same after that. Never quite the same.
The psychiatrists were, I guess, under Cooper's direction, was trying to show that Sirhan's brain wasn't clicking right. And Parsons' favorite expression in regards to Sirhan is, "The boy is sick, the boy is sick," which we thought was a hideous statement. We didn't know that there's a defense that if you weren't in your proper frame of mind at the time that you did something, legally it could help you.
Normally conditioned American who's been trained to kill, then to have no memory of having killed.
Sirhan was unconscious due to hypnotic programming at the time of the assassination and had no knowledge or memory of what happened or the programming process.
Defense psychiatrist Dr. Bernard Diamond used hypnosis to recover Sirhan's memory of the shooting and explore his mental state at the time. Sirhan bought 2 boxes of .22 caliber bullets at Lock, Stock and Barrel and practiced at a firing range for 6 hours on the day of the shooting. He bumped into a friend at Bob's Big Boy and challenged him to a game of pool, but his friend cried off and Sirhan drove down to check out the campaign parties at the Ambassador. He wasn't a drinker, but that night he had 4 Tom Collins cocktails and soon started feeling sleepy.
One of the problems Dr. Diamond had was that Sirhan couldn't remember the actual shooting of Robert Kennedy. So he put him under hypnosis and had him recreate the night of the assassination.
He went back to the hotel in search of coffee and met a girl by a coffee urn. Once brought out of hypnosis, Sirhan again couldn't remember.
To me, it was obvious that he had been programmed to kill Robert Kennedy and programmed to forget that he'd been programmed. And there were all kinds of clues that night that the police tried to suppress, as a matter of fact. One key scene, he's looking over the shoulder of a teletype operator in a press room near the ambassador pantry, and she reported to the police that he seemed in a kind of a trance. And the police told her, "You don't tell anybody that." After they finally subdued him, George Plimpton, the writer, reported that Sirhan's eyes were enormously peaceful. Strange.
In the struggle for the gun, Sirhan showed enormous strength resisting Kennedy's bodyguards. When arresting officers shone a flashlight in his eyes, his pupils were dilated and didn't react, suggesting he may have been drugged.
The stunning thing about Sirhan, stunning fact about him, is that he went under hypnosis so quickly and so willingly, and was so highly programmable to do things like climbing the bars of his cell like a monkey under post-hypnotic suggestion. If there had been some handlers, whether from the CIA or whoever, they had a pretty fit subject on their hands there in Sirhan. Dr. Diamond shied away from that theory that Sirhan was a Manchurian candidate, I think because he didn't want to look silly, and it was a pretty outlandish theory. But the fact that so many years have passed and he stuck to that story lead me to think that he really didn't remember shooting Robert Kennedy, that he probably killed Kennedy in a trance and was programmed to forget that he'd done it, and programmed to forget the names and identities of others who might have helped him do it.
Dr. Herbert Spiegel is a world authority on hypnosis and has taught at Columbia University for over 40 years.
He seemed to be a very hypnotizable person. The people who were programming him worked on the assumption that the Israeli-Arab war was an insult to him, and built up his first skepticism and then his anger to justify getting rid of somebody who was such an enemy of the Arab culture. Up to the time of the coffee, he was not in a trance state. This was the part of their controlling his environment. But probably after that, that's when they induced the hypnosis with him, and from that time until it was all over, he was in a trance state. So he had a spontaneous amnesia for the whole event.
For hours after his arrest, Sirhan happily chatted away to the police in custody without once mentioning the shooting. He didn't realize why he was held until he was arraigned the next morning.
He does not have an emotional knowledge that he committed a crime because he's totally dissociated from it. He could easily feel at ease and sharp and alert because he doesn't feel guilty about anything.
The prosecution discovered a notebook in Sirhan's room that contained repetitious incantations of the phrase, "RFK must die" or "RFK must be assassinated," up and down the page. The prosecution was jubilant because it regarded this as a Rosetta Stone, which confirmed that Sirhan had tried to program himself into committing the assassination.
They are the writings of a maniac. It's my handwriting. They are my thoughts, but I don't remember them. I don't have the guts to do anything like that.
Sirhan later blamed the killing on Kennedy's promise to send 50 bombers to Israel, and the June 5th in his notebook marked the anniversary of Israel's victory in the Six-Day War the year before. Sirhan first learned of Kennedy's support for Israel in a television program on May 20th, yet he wrote the statements in his notebook 2 days earlier.
Before trial, in a hypnotic session inside Sirhan's cell, Dr. Diamond asked Sirhan in trance, "Tell us more about Robert Kennedy." And Sirhan wrote out the phrase, "RFK must die, die, RFK must die." The same kind of repetitious phraseology, indicating that the notebook was written in a hypnotic trance as well.
Writing it down was his way of reinforcing the direction of the programming that was going on.
How much preparation time would we need for something like this?
A few months is all that's necessary, because he was so highly hypnotizable, he could be very quickly programmed, change his perspective in a rather short time, and give him instructions. But the big thing would be to control his environment, to see to it he was the right place at the right time. There was this woman in the polka dot dress and a man, whoever they are. And I just assumed that they were the people who were part of a team who programmed him, and they were the agents to see to it he was at the right place.
So how much time every day would they need to see him for a couple of months to be able to program him?
If I were doing it, I think just 1 or 2 hours a day would be enough.
And how would you mask that so he wouldn't be able to remember going to a certain place?
Yeah, tell him that you won't tell anybody about it. This will be our secret. The people who do it, if they do, don't go around advertising it. And if they do it, they can be very secretive the way they were secretive with Sirhan. So I don't think we can say it's out of style now, or it's not being used now. We don't know.
The CIA had an extensive mind control operation underway, 2 of them, MK Ultra and Operation Artichoke.
Operation Artichoke began in 1953. One of its first experiments asked, can an individual be made to perform an act of assassination involuntarily under the influence of artichoke, against a prominent politician or, if necessary, an American official?
They discovered throughout the 50s and the 60s that they could use hypnoprogramming to manipulate people into committing crimes with no knowledge or memory of what they were doing. That's what happened to Sirhan.
By 1968, Operation Chaos saw the CIA spying on anti-war protesters and the Black Panthers with the help of the LAPD's intelligence division.
The LAPD does have a history of ties with the CIA, and we know that in the persons of 2 people who played a critical role in the investigation, Manuel Peña and Sergeant Enrique or Hank Hernandez.
Hernandez told Sandra Serrano a little about his background during her polygraph test.
I have been called to South America, to Vietnam, Europe, and I have administered tests. The last test that I administered was to the dictator in Caracas, Venezuela. He was a big man, a dictator. Pérez Jiménez was the last name. And this is when there was a transition in the government of Venezuela, and that's when President Betancourt came in, but this is all behind. But there was a great thing involved over there, and I tested this gentleman.
So what is an LAPD polygraph officer doing in South America working for the U.S. government? I mean, that's an indication of a CIA connection. In the case of Manuel Peña, Peña left the LAPD shortly before the assassination and went to work in South America for the Agency for International Development, a division of the State Department, which is a known CIA front. Peña returned to Los Angeles and the LAPD shortly before the assassination and was given command of a division of the Special Investigations Squad, Special Unit Senator, which was concerned with conspiracy charges.
Really working for poor people in this country is a dangerous thing to do. We found out that with King, Dr. King. We found out with threats against Chavez. We found out with Robert Kennedy.
Our main approach here would be that the CIA planned the assassination.
It's possible. I mean, they've done worse things, haven't they? In fact, that's where Robert Kennedy went first. You probably know that when he first heard that his brother was killed, he called John McCone, head of the CIA, and said, "Did your guys do it?" You know.
By 1968, Bobby Kennedy posed a huge threat to the CIA. He was a loose cannon, soft on communism, and a champion of the minorities. And if elected, he would stop the war, take control of the CIA, and reinvestigate his brother's death, throwing the spotlight on the agency. I discovered new footage which appeared to show 3 senior CIA agents at the Ambassador Hotel that night. But to understand who these men were and the bitterness between the CIA and Bobby Kennedy, we have to go back to the Bay of Pigs.
Kennedy was handed the CIA's plan for the invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs in 1961. And of course, as the world knows, it was a colossal failure.
The CIA blamed the Kennedys for withdrawing air support at the last moment, leaving the men they had trained to be massacred on the beaches.
The failure of the Bay of Pigs placed the Kennedy administration in huge embarrassment. Something had to be done about Castro.
Robert Kennedy
took over, in effect, the operative direction of the CIA?
I was an active duty Army officer, a regular Army captain in 1963, with a specialty in covert and paramilitary intelligence operations. Suddenly was beckoned to Washington, D.C. and offered an opportunity to serve with the CIA in its secret war against Cuba. I transferred to South Florida to JM Wave, which is the only CIA station that was ever established on U.S. soil. I met the assistant chief of station, a fellow by the name of Gordon Campbell, who later became my case officer on a particular mission shortly before the Kennedy assassination. I also worked with a fellow by the name of David Morales, who was the chief of operations. The concept was to conduct covert paramilitary operations involving infiltration and commando raids in an effort to destabilize Cuba. We also embarked on efforts to assassinate Fidel Castro. Bobby Kennedy, chairing the special group, had to pass on each and every mission. It created a huge amount of resentment on the part of the operational people at JM Wave. Particularly, I know for a fact, Morales, because I had sat in on briefings or heard him go into a rage in his office where he would throw chairs and go absolutely berserk when the word came down that that operation had to be changed or possibly even canceled because the risk of attribution and unintended consequences was too great.
I will never forget being on the steps of the cathedral after the assassination and seeing Bob Kennedy come down the steps. I never have seen a more ravaged man in my life. He didn't know who was responsible for the murder of his brother. Was it the CIA? Was it Cuban nationals? Was it part of the Cuban brigade? There was such guilt about the role that he played, and did I inadvertently set in motion the forces that led to my brother's death?
The word around the station was that Castro had killed Kennedy, and that Oswald was an operative, a Castro operative. Deep in my guts, I had some feeling that what we had been doing down there was in some way connected. But there was also a kind of gnawing suspicion about some of the things I had heard at the station, the anti-Kennedy comments, the sentiments that were expressed about the Bay of Pigs, just discussed with the Kennedy administration. From that point forward, I had growing suspicions about the agency's role in John Kennedy's assassination.
The secrets of both Kennedy assassinations may lie buried in a desert cemetery in Arizona.
They called him a man of 1,000 faces. That's what he was called. He hated all communists, you know. He what you call 100% American all the way through. You don't mess with him and he'll blow your ass apart.
Morales was a legendary backstreet operator for the CIA. If you saw him on the streets of a South American capital, you knew a coup was about to happen.
That's when the terrorists took over for 3.5 years. They went from door to door. Vive aquí Juan Perez, you know, as soon as they opened the door, you had to kill children, old man, anybody that's there got killed right down the line. All these holy people that think that by talking to people you're going to get it done, you got to kill them.
He was striding around the room and he was out of control. And I don't ever recall seeing him lose it like that before.
And what was his actual comment then that finished that?
It was something like, I was in Dallas when we got that motherfucker, and I was in Los Angeles when we got the little bastard. What it said to me was that he was in some way implicated with the death of John Kennedy. And let's go one step further, and also Bobby.
They were sort of getting it. I wanted some information about what happened down there, at Dallas. And as we were drinking, and they finally did his something. Well, he let them know in a roundabout way, well, we got the son of a bitch. That's what he said.
And so in the same conversation, Robert said that Diddy said, I was in Los Angeles too when we got the little bastard, meaning Bobby.
No, he was in Los Angeles, but he didn't say that we got him, you know, that they got him. There's just a difference, you know, the wording, you know. Because the only reason he'd be in that area at that moment, because he had his daughters were married, you know. One of them was living over there, you know.
Okay.
I say, what's the matter with you, Diddy? He said, I don't feel too good. I said, why not? He said, I had a few drinks with my cronies up there before I left West D.C. I said, really? He said, on the plane I haven't been feeling good now. I said, I was just waiting for you because I'm going to take off and go to Wilcox. You know, he used to leave his truck right then and drive over there. Okay, well then, let me know as soon as you get there. Let me know how you feel. You know, and you got me worried. You don't look the same no more. You know, I mean, he's all happy-go-lucky.
That night, Morales had a massive heart attack. The ambulance took hours to arrive and didn't bring any oxygen. Within a week, he was dead.
They wasted 5 hours to get him to the hospital, to make damn sure that he didn't, I guess he wanted him dead, I guess, real good, by orders, I don't know.
And when you say they, so who killed David?
They'll have to draw you a picture, the same people he worked for.
The CIA?
Yeah, because he was going to go before the Senate, you know, they summoned him, you know, to go before the Senate. But before he could get there, they knocked him off, man, you know, because he knew too much. Yeah, he was the number one man in the CIA. He only had two bosses, the president and the head of the CIA.
And didn't he have plans to teach?
Yeah, he wanted to go teach at Flagstaff, political science.
Yeah, that's the figure that I had previously identified as Morales. His nose was a little more flattened, but the stance, the shoulders, the face, the tie askew, the general facial impression is an individual that I would identify as Morales to a practically 100% degree.
Please, could we ask for your cooperation? Those of you inside of the circle around here, could you move back, please, in a way you can't do anything, and you can't see anything, and there's nothing here.
This definitely, from the profile, is hugely similar. The body language is very, very much characteristic of Morales. See how he moves back and forth very casually, does not attract attention to himself? That is no question.
I also showed these clips to Wayne Smith, who worked with Morales at the U.S. Embassy in Havana in 1959.
Monitors the ballroom moments before
That's him.
shooting.
That's Dave Morales.
Really?
Yeah, I'm virtually certain. Is there anything?
No, we see him again. We see him
go
again.
ahead.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
do
and
it.
you'll see him
Yeah.
repeated.
Yeah,
The body language is very, very much characteristic.
yeah. I mean, he turns that way. That's Morales. That's Morales. Yeah, I knew Morales quite well. He worked in the CIA station in Havana when I was third secretary of the political section. 59 until we broke relations in 61. And saw him again a number of times. When I saw him in Argentina, we got into an argument about Kennedy, Bay of Pigs, and all that. And what he said was that Kennedy got what was coming to him.
And did he give any indication that he might have been involved in some way?
He didn't. He said Kennedy got what was coming to him. He said it in a very determined way, so he took great satisfaction in it, but no, he didn't.
Is there a benign explanation for why he would be there?
Well, I don't see any. I mean, if the CIA or the security division of the Department of State ordered him to be there to protect Bobby Kennedy, that'd be one thing, but I don't think that's the case. And if they didn't, then there is no benign explanation that I can think of.
And is David Morales a suitable figure to protect Bobby Kennedy?
No. No, I mean, in my wildest imagination, I couldn't imagine assigning David Morales to protect any of the Kennedys. Bobby Kennedy is assassinated. David Morales is there. Well, the two things have to be related.
After these interviews, I found more clips of the same man emerging from the pantry among a group of police officers.
And was taken away by the police. As we understand it, there was only one person involved in the shooting.
Minutes later, he's seen lurking in shadow outside the pantry doorway, and popping his head around the doorway 2 minutes later to listen to Valerie Schulte, the official girl in the polka dot dress. Again, Ayers and Smith identified this man as David Morales. The LAPD showed a 20-minute film of the shooting to witnesses and investigators. It included the following clip of two men walking through the ballroom from the direction of the pantry as panic spreads that Kennedy has been shot. There is no mention of them in the police investigation files.
Yeah, that's excellent. I could certainly verify 90% ID of Gordon Campbell. Less a little hair, as I remembered him. The facial features are certainly his, absolutely. And I'm looking beyond the face. I'm looking at the body, the carriage. Take a look at that again. Obviously, the two of them are together. They're looking for a way out because this fellow is guiding him, showing him an exit.
Campbell also appears in a photograph taken in the ballroom a couple of hours before the shooting.
Can you identify the man with him?
No, I told you that face is familiar, but I've looked at that photograph. I can't. It does not surprise me at all that these folks would be so audacious as to believe that they could pull this off. In fact, they did.
I had been told by a group of people that I was working with that had worked for Central Intelligence. We just did a short project in alarm systems just days before that, and they had mentioned that at the Ambassador Hotel, I says, hey Rayburn, don't you go there all the time? And I said, yeah, I live just down the road. He says, wow, so they're gonna have a big to-do there. Are you gonna be there? I said, yeah, I could be there. So just one of those things. That's not an unusual thing for any of the agencies. Even police departments will give free tickets to functions and such as that just to have their people in the audience. I was walking across, going towards the front doors when I heard the gunshots. And, it's just like a little pop, 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 popping sound, could barely hear. Could he have done it alone? I don't think so. I don't think the man's makeup would have allowed him to do that in the first place. I think there was probably a lot of people involved. Why that never came out is a mystery still. He showed me the picture, and I told him that I'd seen the guy there on the premises. I didn't see him in the ballroom. I saw him out in the lobby area. In fact, I probably saw him several times. He was in and out.
See him there?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll be darned.
I was playing on a tiny bit.
Oh, that's him,
full
yeah.
frontal. So do you think that's the same man that you saw in the photograph?
Oh, yeah. That's him. Yeah. They definitely were observing and collecting information.
Okay, I just want you to have a look at this photograph. The two men in the center. This photograph was taken in the ballroom. I just wonder if you saw either of those men that night.
This man here, the bald one,
yeah,
I think he was talking to Morales at one time.
So you'd be sure then that the man on the left in the photograph was talking to Morales at one point?
I'm almost certain, yeah. Yeah, you've got the military stance, arms behind their back. That's a dead giveaway.
So this is a swing door to the pantry, and we have a small mustachioed man here, and we have our bald man here, seems to be carrying something.
Yeah, there he is.
Is this the same man that you saw there on the net?
Oh yeah. That's him. Because their central intelligence doesn't make them bad guys automatically. They're out there protecting our country like everyone. By the same token, it doesn't mean they can't have turned bad. Sirhan was probably one of several that were armed and ready to take him. Sirhan was, in my opinion, also a throwaway. He's what we call the shooter in the public's eye. But who the real shooter was, in this level here, you get a professional. And a professional you'll never see, you'll never know, you'll never know anything except that they were there. That's about it. We camouflage firearms in all different kinds of configurations. Sometimes it'd look like a daytimer, purse-like situation. It'd show a zipper on the outside, but it had Velcro and you could pop it open. You know.
Would they have used a silencer, do you think? So they wouldn't hear the extra shots?
Strongly possible, yeah. Silencers can be made out of all kinds of things too. Maybe a book or something like that could be inside that, and it could be muffled. You walk up into a busy area like an airport or whatever and stand next to somebody and pop them, boom, boom, and just walk away, you know. As they fall, you're going the other direction. That would have been the proper way to do it, and just disappear. Not get out there like Sirhan did and start shooting his gun. And I mean, that could have been to draw that away from the real shooter. Suspicion, high suspicion. Yes, I can't deny that. Why they were doing the things that they were doing, I'm surprised that was never investigated. After all of these years, you'd think that someone would have noticed these things and done something about them.
And can you say anything about how you knew Gordon Campbell or what you know of him, who he was?
No.
Okay, that's fine. But you have met Gordon Campbell?
I've seen pictures of it.
Okay. Do you know if Campbell is still alive?
To my knowledge, yes.
Do you know where?
No.
David later told me he had seen Campbell several times in the year before the assassination in a police station environment. With Campbell now linked to Morales, I turned my attention to the third man standing next to Campbell in the photograph.
I first met George Joanidis in 1977 when I was working at the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Let me just take you back a minute. Here we were, a congressional committee, investigating who might have killed a president back in 1963. As you know, the majority of the American public at the time thought there had been a conspiracy. I had been a law student at Cornell Law School. I was a bit of a rebel, and so was Dan Hardway, my partner, looking at these files. We would dress up in cut-off shorts just below our crotch area, and we would show up at the CIA in these outfits.
The man the CIA called out of retirement to act as their liaison to the committee was George Joanidis. He never disclosed he worked as Chief of Psychological Warfare Operations at the CIA's Miami base in 1963.
George Joanidis was the guy who was supposed to be our point person. He was probably in his mid-50s, a dapper guy, funny and affable. He might joke with you about a football game or a baseball game or a movie that you'd seen. But when we got down to work, he was all business. What we could see, what we couldn't see, why we could see something, why we couldn't see something, why it was redacted, why it wasn't redacted. I mean, George was the gatekeeper. He was the guy who stonewalled us. The Lopez report, as has become known over the years, basically concluded there was some type of a relationship between the CIA and Lee Harvey Oswald. Exactly what that relationship was, we could never tell. I have no doubt in my mind that he was being run by someone at the CIA. Was there a connection to the point where they were running the assassination? That we could not confirm.
Oswald spent the summer of 1963 in New Orleans, handing out bills supporting Castro. Here he had a well-publicized confrontation with the CIA-sponsored anti-Castro group called the DRE. Some believe this fight was staged to create a communist legend for Oswald prior to the assassination. After his death in 1990, Jefferson Morley discovered that the CIA case officer for the DRE at the time was George Joanides.
How could we trust anything that the CIA was giving us if the guy that was our point of contact, who controlled what we saw or didn't see, happened to have been a person whom we would have investigated back then had we known who he was?
Let me now show you a photograph that was taken in the Ambassador Hotel the night Robert Kennedy died. And I'd like you to look at the figure on the right center of frame.
Well, when I look at this picture, to me it's a younger George Joanides. I couldn't say 100% that it's him, but if I was a betting man, that I'm 99% sure that it's George Joanides. The guy is young and in shape, always standing, stands erect. It's the way I remember him being. The glasses, his hair slightly receding. I mean, you just look at him and you say, oh, this is the guy that I spent many hours with at Langley. This is George Joanides. George Joanides is an enigma to me. After he died, when I heard that he'd been involved with JM Wave, that he'd been involved with the DRE, and now looking at this photo, it doesn't surprise me for a minute to find him at the Ambassador Hotel on the day that Bobby Kennedy was shot. If he was the level operative that he appears to have been through DRE and JM Wave, if another operation was going on that was key, he would have been there. These are people who will do anything for the good of their country. And if it meant assassinating a second Kennedy to make sure that he didn't rise to power because he would be dangerous for the country, they do it.
Journalist David Talbot and Jefferson Morley found two others who could identify Joanides. Ed Lopez, investigative partner Dan Hardway, and Chilo Borja, a key figure in the DRE. The Joanides family have refused to comment on the photograph. I also found more photographs of Campbell and Joanides in the ballroom, taken from behind, with a third man I have not been able to identify. I had now identified 3 senior operatives at the hotel with 3 unidentified associates. The man who connects all 3 is the late Ted Shackley, station chief at JM Wave and later Saigon, where Morales and Joanides would again work for him in the late 60s. Above him, the chain of command led right to the top.
Someone else high up would know about it. Would 4 other people know about it? No, but one other person high up would know about it. But that nothing would be written about it, so that it couldn't be traced, because the issue of plausible deniability was paramount with the agency.
Our witnesses leading off today are Mr. Richard Helms, who was the director of the CIA during the period in question.
Is it policy not to transmit some things in writing?
Sir, when the day comes that in an intelligence organization, particularly a secret intelligence organization, everything has to be put in writing, it's going to come to a resounding halt, I'm afraid.
And if I had to pick one person who would know about this operation, it'd be Richard Helms. He was this angry, very crude guy.
So the agent gives the Cuban agent the device to kill somebody.
I'm sorry he didn't give him a pistol, because it would have made the whole thing a lot simpler and less exotic.
Well, whether it's a pistol or a needle, if Amlash is a political plot to destabilize the government, what in the blazes are we giving an agent a device that will kill Castro with for if it's not an assassination plot?
Well, if you want to have it that way, why don't you just have it that way?
He had no respect for what we were doing. He was angry about being where he was. And he had no compunction about letting us know what his feelings were, which sort of blew us away.
Helms initiated the CIA's mind control program in 1953 and was a close colleague of the man who ran it for the next 20 years, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. But as I built my case against the CIA, I also had to factor in some negative identifications.
Okay, see the figure in the white shirt here? So we see
No, this one right here?
Yeah.
No way.
No?
Nuh-uh. No way, that's not him at all. That's not him.
Is there any resemblance at all?
No. Well, that's the same person it was before. No, those are security guards there for Kennedy. And I guarantee you he was no security guard for him. That's not him, I guarantee you it's not him.
I really don't know why Reuben would respond that way. I guess probably when confronted with a photograph, which would be pretty hard evidence, putting him on the spot, may be reluctant to condemn his lifelong friend. He can live with the thought that Morales may have been involved in some way, almost be proud of it, but to ID him may be just too far a reach for him. And it doesn't surprise me.
I also interviewed Tom Clines and Ed Wilson, close colleagues of Morales who weren't willing to go on camera. Wilson didn't recognize Morales. Clines said it looked like him, but Morales walked with his tie down and more of a slouch, which I found a little strange. On balance, I still felt I was on the right track with my 3 suspects and aired the story in a segment on the BBC.
Now, formally, I believe the CIA have said what about these guys? They say they don't comment.
You know, I mean, the comment you'd expect, that they can't go into previous operatives' identities, and that also they have no domestic jurisdiction. So the question that we're asking is, we have interviewed various people who knew these men well. They say that they're the men in the photographs, so we're asking the CIA and the Los Angeles Police Department to address that question.
Assuming there is much more to it than the straight Sirhan story, do you think we'll ever get to the bottom of it?
I think it's important that we do. I mean, there's a guy called Paul Schrade who was walking behind Kennedy on the night and he was shot in the head, and he's been one of the leading campaigners to reopen the case for years because of the second gun theory and various doubts that there have been around. So I think this evidence is quite important because it's the first time that we've actually showed a CIA presence on the night at a domestic assassination, and it's important that we get some answers to this from the relevant authorities.
You know, every day there's new revelations, Mr. Sullivan. And this is the most revealing so far, or one of the most revealing. My understanding is that the senator didn't want any protection, and if they weren't there to protect him, what were they doing there? How could Sirhan determine the last-minute change of plans on the direction of Kennedy's travel throughout that whole area? Because there's no way Sirhan could have found out the change of plan and direction and be there lying in wait without some sort of direction, and this explains it. That may explain why Sirhan doesn't remember. It's horrendous to think that you know, or the government would be involved in something like this, but if it is, let's get down to the bottom of it and find out the truth.
After the BBC story, I sent the video of Morales to others who knew him at CIA. None of them could recognize him. Manuel Chavez said he was too tall and light-skinned. He remembered Morales as 5'10" with very dark Indian features. Then, with the help of journalist David Talbot, I discovered new photographs of Morales taken in Peru and Vietnam in the years before and after the assassination. While Bradley Ayres feels these confirm his identification, now I'm not so sure. Morales said he was there, but I'm not sure this is the same person. But the strangest twist came with Gordon Campbell. I was told he died of a massive heart attack at JM Wave in 1962, a year before Bradley Ayres even met him. But this Campbell was 57 years old, much older than the man Ayres knew. Were there 2 Gordon Campbells, or was it simply a cover identity? Then, with the help of an American journalist, I found more clips of Campbell and could chart his movements throughout the evening with the help of his blue sports coat and distinctive hairline. We see him with the group in the ballroom early on, then watching the returns next to Roger Mudd. Then a man calls out Mike, and Campbell joins a group in the middle of the ballroom in a light-hearted mood and gesturing at the bank of TV cameras behind him. Just before the speech, Campbell walks through the room with a colleague, and then walks forward towards the stage as the crowd get word of the shooting. It was now clear he didn't emerge from the pantry but was watching the speech from the back of the ballroom with this group. 2 new clips also showed his immediate reaction to the shooting. Later on, we see him listening to interviews with witnesses.
Were you back there when the shooting occurred?
Yes.
The Latin man with Campbell also turned up cheering for Kennedy earlier in the night,
Once again, this is
listening
Chuck
to
Bowman
interviews later on,
from the Ambassador Hotel,
and chatting with eyewitness George Green. But who were the group with Campbell in the ballroom 30 minutes before the shooting? I found 2 photographs in the police investigation files suggesting they had checked out these people. Campbell is circled along with some other men. On the back of the photograph is the name Michael Roman. The group were salesmen for the Bulliver Watch Company at the hotel for a sales meeting. Michael D. Roman was the national sales manager and vice president of Bulliver. Before his appointment, he served as police commissioner of Winfield, Illinois, where he also raised ponies and collies. Was this a case of mistaken identity, or was Michael D. Roman Gordon Campbell's real identity?
Accutron time is kept by a tuning fork instead of a balance wheel. It splits a second into 360 parts and is used as a timer in satellites. The most precise time you can keep on your wrist.
Bulliver was no ordinary company. Chairman of the board was Omar N. Bradley, a 5-star general and hero of World War II, now living in Beverly Hills. 40% of Bulliver's revenue came from the defense industry, and sources told me it was a well-known CIA cover. Roman had been appointed vice president by Bradley in 1964. In the spring of 1968, Bradley was one of the wise men advising Johnson on his strategy in Vietnam. The FBI finally interviewed Michael D. Roman 5 months after the assassination, and he reported nothing out of the ordinary. In 1976, he became the head of the Retail Jewelers of America and was a well-respected figure in the industry for the next 20 years. He died in 2002. Roman's family deny he led a double life with the CIA and identified the man next to him as Frank Owens, a regional sales manager for Bulliver who died a few years ago. Did Roman and Owens double as Campbell and Joanides? It seems unlikely, but at this point I just don't know. Whether the CIA were involved or not, one thing has stayed constant over the years.
One thing that has not changed is the fact that he does not remember.
Sirhan is still in prison and has been turned down for parole 13 times.
He's been turned down every time and always on the same ground. He lacks remorse. But it's circular, because how can you lack remorse if the basis for that finding of lack of remorse is that you don't remember, and if in fact you're telling the truth when you say you don't remember? Of course he's telling the truth. That's why he's requested hypnosis in order for him to be able to recall.
With a proper, well-designed regression technique, it's possible to uncover that memory. He could possibly reveal how he was programmed and where he was going and what he was going to do about it. But the court would not give me permission to do it.
The Ambassador Hotel closed in 1989 and the pantry gradually deteriorated. Now the hotel itself is gone to make way for a new high school in memory of Bobby Kennedy. But nearly 40 years on, the mystery around this case still remains. Were senior CIA agents at the hotel that night? Did they program Sirhan to shoot Robert Kennedy or to act as a decoy for the real assassin? I still can't say for sure what happened that night, but the evidence that others were involved is mounting.
See, this is not an Agatha Christie mystery story where everything is neatly tied up in a bow in chapter 23 at the end of the book. It's one of our most enduring murder mysteries, and it will probably continue to be such. That's the way life is. Nothing is ever quite resolved, is it?
And what can be done with the case now?
To find the truth. To find the truth. With all these, as I've grown up with this case, there are just things that boggle the mind that should be looked into, for the love of humanity. If all of this leads to where we suspect it's going to lead, we don't want it to ever happen again.
The first wish that I wish that Senator Kennedy was still alive. I wish that every day that I've been here. Second one, that there should be peace in the Middle East.
There are some who talk about my youth. It is true I am younger than many who have run for president, and older than many of those who founded this country. Whatever my years, however, I would gladly match my experience with that of others who have aspired to the presidency. And after all, we are still a young country.